Picture this. You're stranded in the middle of the ocean. Not for a few days, or even a couple of weeks, but for 438 days. Just you, a tiny fishing boat, and whatever's left of your will to keep going. That's exactly what happened to Salvador Alvarenga, a 37-year-old fisherman from Mexico, completely cut off from everything and everyone, fighting through storms, starvation, and crushing despair. Each morning the sun came up. It was just another day he had to find a way to survive. Back in 2012, what started as just another fishing trip turned into an absolute nightmare. With no working motor, no radio, and no land anywhere in sight, Alvarenga ended up drifting more than 5,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean. This is the incredible true story of a man who simply refused to let the ocean win. So here's where it all began. Salvador Alvarenga was 37 years old, in 2012 a Salvadoran fisherman, trying to make a living along Mexico's Pacific coast. He didn't have family nearby. His 13-year-old daughter was living with her mother back in El Salvador, far away from the harsh fishing life that kept him going. The loneliness of the sea suited him just fine, along with the risk that came with every trip out. His boat was a narrow fiberglass panga, about 25 feet long. No cabin, no roof, just the bare essentials. It was basically a sleek blade designed to cut through waves, light and quick, with a small outboard motor attached to the back. He trusted that boat. He trusted his own skills. And he trusted the ocean well, to a point, anyway. On November 18th, he headed out again. This time he brought along a partner, Ezequiel Cordoba, 22-year-old guy who was inexperienced but willing to learn. They were planning for a long day, starting at 10 in the morning and going until well after dark, about 6 hours offshore. They'd loaded over 1,000 pounds of gear onto the deck, including this massive icebox that they were hoping to fill with tuna, shark, and mahi-mahi. Now, there were storm warnings, pretty clear ones, actually, but Alvarenga brushed them off. One really good catch could pay for an entire week. By late evening, they'd pushed about 75 miles out into open water. Alvarenga set up his Gira fishing line almost 2 miles long that disappeared down into the depths. The wind started picking up. Back on shore, the storm was literally ripping roofs off houses. But out where they were just starting to feel its power. Around 1 in the morning, the boat took its first serious hit. The panga lurched and slammed around, with water pouring over the sides. Cordoba was gripping everything he could, practically begging to turn back. Then the waves got even more vicious, and the sea started really attacking the boat. Alvarenga had to make a brutal choice. To save the vessel, he cut his fishing line, losing thousands of dollars worth of fish and equipment, just watching it all sink into the Black Pacific. He turned the boat toward shore, aiming for Chiapas, the little port he called home. As water kept flooding the deck, he grabbed the radio and got through to his boss to report what was happening. Then the connection died, and the night just swallowed them up. When the sun came up, Alvarenga could see mountains' dark shapes, rising from the horizon. Land, safety, if he could just navigate the boat through the brutal surf. Crashing against the shoreline. They might actually make it home, but just 15 miles out, everything went wrong. The motor coughed, sputtered, and died. He pulled the starter cord again and again, until finally, in pure desperation, he yanked it so hard that it just snapped right off in his hand. Without power, the boat started wallowing in the waves, rolling from side to side, like a piece of driftwood. He got on the radio and called Willie, his voice breaking, begging for rescue. Willie answered and promised help. But then the radio started crackling, fizzled out, and died as seawater got into the circuits. The line went dead. After that, all they could hear was the screaming wind and the hiss of rain. The storm pushed them farther and farther out, past the horizon, into the vast emptiness of the Pacific. By the time the weather finally calmed down, 5 endless days later, They were nearly 300 miles offshore. Their boat sat so low in the water that it would have been invisible to any other vessel more than half a mile away. They were just tiny specks in an indifferent ocean. Cordoba started breaking down first. "We're going to die," he said quietly. His voice was flat, like he'd already given up. "No," Alvarenga told him. "Don't say that. A rescue team will find us." Honestly, he didn't entirely believe it himself, but he couldn't let despair take over. They had no flares, no radio, no way to signal anyone. The sun scorched them during the day, and the nights were freezing cold. Their only shelter was the icebox, where they huddled together for warmth. Hunger and thirst gnawed at them until their bodies felt completely empty. On the fourth day, without water, rain finally came. They stripped off their clothes, lifted their faces to the sky, and drank greedily as fresh water poured down. They managed to catch about 5 gallons in random bottles they'd pulled from the waves. If they were careful with it, it might last a week. By the 11th day, desperation gave them something else. Meat. A turtle, confused in the dark, bumped into the hull. Alvarenga hauled it aboard, almost giddy with relief. Its flesh fed them. Its blood gave them something to drink. From then on, Alvarenga kept hunting, constantly scanning the water for more of these life-saving creatures. Cordoba struggled with it though. He gagged at the blood and barely picked at the raw meat. Alvarenga tried to make it more bearable, slicing the flesh into strips, seasoning it with seawater, and drying it in the sun on the casing of the dead motor. He'd serve it on the turtle shell like it was some kind of crude feast. It kept them alive. Barely. Hunger started messing with their minds. Cordoba began hallucinating, imagining an orange orchard blooming right in front of him. He kept begging Alvarenga for fruit. To calm him down, Alvarenga played along, pretending to make a trip to a store to buy oranges, then coming back to say the store was closed. Somehow, this little made-up story comforted Cordoba enough that he drifted off to sleep. Weeks turned into months. Their survival became less about finding food and water and more about sheer willpower. Every sunrise was another test. Could they make it through one more day in a sea that seemed to have no end? The days just blurred together until they developed a routine, fragile but necessary. Every morning at 5, Alvarenga would climb out of the icebox and sit on the deck, staring east. The sunrise was his one constant, a burning line of light that reminded him that land still existed somewhere beyond the horizon. His first task was always checking the traps. Some mornings there'd be a small fish. Other mornings, nothing. Whatever the catch was, he'd wait for Cordoba to wake up before splitting it. Fairness mattered, even out there. Most of the day they spent buried in the icebox, trying to conserve their strength. In that coffin-like space, a friendship formed an odd, boyish bond. At night, they'd lie on the open deck, with their faces turned up, tracing constellations in the stars. It was a game they played to trick themselves into believing they weren't completely alone. On a night they thought was Christmas Eve, reality hit hard. Cordoba doubled over, clutching his stomach. He'd eaten part of a seabird earlier. When they cut it open, they found a snake curled up inside its stomach, still intact. He survived the poisoning, but after that, he could barely bring himself to eat. The thought of another raw bird made him sick. He started pulling away from their shared meals, withdrawing into himself. More weeks passed. Cordoba's body wasted away to almost nothing, arms, like twigs, thighs no thicker than his forearms. He decided it was better to die than to keep enduring the hunger. One day, he said goodbye and tried to throw himself into the sea. Alvarenga tackled him, dragging him across the deck and shoving him into the icebox, slamming the lid shut and sitting on it like a prison guard. He begged Cordoba to stop, to hold on long enough so they could tell their story. When Cordoba finally calmed down, Alvarenga let him out and climbed in beside him, still pleading. But despair had already done its damage. A few days later, Cordoba told him he was going to die. Alvarenga tried, forcing water on him. "Don't die," he begged. "Don't leave me alone." It didn't matter. Moments later, Cordoba was gone. Alvarenga propped the body up on the bench to keep it from sliding overboard. The next morning, he came out of the icebox and found his dead companion sitting there with the sun on his face, as if he were just resting. In his grief, Alvarenga started talking to him, asking questions, pretending to hear answers. Pretending Cordoba was still alive was easier than facing the horrible truth. 6 days later, he finally let the body slip into the sea. Alone now, drifting on the Pacific, he retreated into the icebox and wept. With Cordoba gone, survival became his only focus. He hunted constantly and even invented a crude shark warning system, toss bird parts overboard and wait to see if anything big came up. If the water stayed empty, he'd risk a swim. Short, terrifying dives that he imagined were visits to a beach with friends. More and more, his thoughts turned inward. He pictured his 14-year-old daughter, Fatima, whom he hadn't seen in years. In his dreams, she'd call out to him, her voice a lifeline. He started building a future in his Minda small house, children running in a field, animals grazing. He prayed for just one more chance to make it real. One afternoon, after months of seeing nothing but endless horizon, a ship appeared, a huge container vessel, cutting straight toward him. For a moment, Alvarenga thought it might actually run him down. 3 men stood at the back, fishing lines in their hands. He screamed and waved frantically. They looked up. They saw him. They even waved back. But no one came. No lifeboat was lowered. No voice called out across the water. The ship just slid past, as indifferent as the sea itself. When it vanished, something inside him broke. His body slowed down, his hunger dulled. The same numb emptiness that had swallowed Cordoba started seeping into his own bones. He drifted through his 11th month at sea, 5,000 miles traveled at less than a mile an hour. He was reduced to little more than rags and skin. A sweatshirt that had belonged to Cordoba shielded him from the sun. Below the waist, he wore only torn underwear and a single random sneaker he'd pulled from the water. His hair had grown into a wild, copper-colored tangle. His beard, thick and unkempt, hid most of his face. More and more, he turned to questions he couldn't answer. Was he alive by accident, or by some kind of design? Some days he wondered if his ordeal was meant as a warning, a testament to human endurance. Other times he thought it might be punishment. Maybe the only reason he was still breathing was to carry a message that solitude, suffering, and the will to survive could hold back the urge to give up. On January 30th, 2014, the ocean finally broke its silence. Alvarenga spotted coconuts floating in the water. Above him, seabirds wheeled around in dense, noisy flocks. Then, through sheets of cold rain, a strip of land appeared low, green, and wild. He waited, watching for sharks, slowly paddling closer over half a day. At about 10 yards out, he jumped into the surf and let the waves carry him in. He collapsed on the sand, grabbing it with both hands, like it was a prize, like proof that solid ground still existed. 2 islanders found him barely recognizable as human, a castaway who seemed to have materialized out of legend. He'd landed on Eben Atoll, at the southern edge of the Marshall Islands, one of the most remote places on the planet. If he'd missed it, the next possible land was the Philippines, another 3,000 miles to the west. Doctors later told him he had anemia, and probably parasites from all the raw meat he'd eaten to stay alive. He couldn't sleep, his body just refused rest. Worse than the physical sickness was the memory of Cordoba, his companion, his counterpart, his ghost, who never really left him, even on solid ground. After 11 days in the hospital, Alvarenga was strong enough to fly home to El Salvador. When he saw his daughter Fatima, he held on to her, as if she might disappear, whispering apologies for all the years he'd lost. But life on land was no real rescue. For months, he lived in a state of shock, haunted by the sea. He couldn't look at water without panic taking over. He slept with the lights on. He refused to be alone. The habits of survival, constant vigilance, fear. The expectation of death stayed with him long after the ocean had let him go. It was nearly a year before he could begin to truly understand what he'd been through. Only then, looking at maps of his drift across the Pacific, did the immensity of it really hit him. 438 days. 5,000 miles. Hunger, thirst, madness, loss survived by willpower alone. Alvarenga had survived where few people could. He'd been pushed to the very edge of human endurance, and somehow hadn't gone over. His ordeal stands as both a testament and a warning that the line between despair and survival is far thinner than most people ever dare to imagine. If you found this story as gripping as we did, don't forget to give this video a like, share it with someone who loves true survival stories, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.